You are beautiful, and there is no one else like you. The world is a better place because you are in it, and the world needs your light. This video is part of my Black Women and Self-Love series, and I want to share some practical strategies and some things that you can do to start your self-love journey. A lot of us, myself included, have struggled with self-love. But the truth is, self-love is a journey. And I'm taking practical steps to affirm myself and take care of myself as I'm on the self-love journey. And that's what I want to share with you today. Practical strategies to start your self-love journey. So one important thing that you can do to start your self-love journey is to start a self-coaching program that is aimed at helping you get to the root of your issues and trauma that may be impacting you and affecting you in the present day. So what I mean by self-coaching program is some structured workbook or program that you can be a part of, or even just working with a therapist, something that is structured, ideally step by step, that is going to help you work through issues that come up day to day that are rooted and grounded in deeper issues. So a self-coaching program oftentimes is going to involve some form of meditation and journaling, because that is going to help you figure out what's coming up for me as I am navigating this situation in my life, in my day-to-day life that has me kind of triggered. So I am currently doing a program focused on manifesting. It's called To Be Magnetic. And in To Be Magnetic, they often talk about the triggers that you experience day to day, those heightened emotional experiences that you feel on a day-to-day basis. Those are opportunities for you to do shadow work. So that emotional work where you're working through trauma. Those are an opportunity for you to do shadow work and to kind of get to the root of what is causing you to feel this heightened emotional reaction. It's really true, because the things that trigger you, they're often rooted in something deeper, in something from your past, oftentimes from your childhood. So let me give you all an example. A few months ago, when my twins, they're 5 now, when they were starting kindergarten, we went to, I think it was open house. We went to open house, and as we were leaving, the PTO, so the Parent Teachers Association or PTA, whatever, they had Parent Teacher Organization, I think, but they had this little setup where it was this huge pencil, and they had a desk where the kids could essentially take pictures and kind of commemorate this moment where they were starting kindergarten. So my husband and I, we were sitting and waiting, and we were the first ones there. My daughter first sat down at the desk, and she was holding the big pencil, and we were taking pictures of her. And then I noticed that another family came up where it was a woman and her son, and they came up and they were waiting, and she just looked her whole disposition was she just looked like she had, she just did not look like she was in a good mood. So I could tell from her body language and stuff, she was waiting for us to hurry up. And so my daughter got up, and so my son sat down, and shortly after my son sat down, she told her son to go, she told her son to go up and essentially try to rush my child or whatever. So my son, we got a few pictures of him, and so the little boy went and he sat down, and me being the person I am, just kind of petty, I just kind of encouraged my son to continue sitting down. We were taking pictures and was just kind of unbothered, or appearing unbothered by her. But then eventually, I just went ahead and told my son to come on, and then we just went and left, or we were on our way out, and I just kind of loudly told my husband, folks are so rude. People are so rude. She was so rude. She did not have to tell her child to sit down while we were still taking pictures. I said it within earshot, because, that's just my little, I could be a little passive aggressive here and there. So when we left, I was really triggered by that situation. I was really upset. I was telling my husband, who does that lady think she is? Who is she to rush my child? Da, 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 da. And I was just going through like kind of like this negative spiral and thinking to myself, like, I should have stood up for my son more and gave him more time to take the pictures. And I should have done this. I should have showed up differently. Maybe I should have told that woman X, Y, and Z. And because I'm like doing To Be Magnetic, I recognize like, there's more here than what's on the surface. And it's not about the rude lady trying to take the PTO pictures. Like, what's going on here? And I had to stop and kind of think, like, my kids have moved on. They don't care. We still got some cute pictures. The pictures that I got that have the little boy, the other kid in it, I can easily like crop out. Like, at the end of the day, like, it's really not that serious aside from whatever is triggering me in that moment. And so when I started doing this work and started thinking to myself, like, what is really like triggering me about the situation? Part of what I realized was really triggering to me about the situation is that I felt like in that moment that I had to like dispel any stereotypes about like the angry Black woman. And I felt like I was like in other Black women, like I'm sure like you all, you know what I'm talking about as far as like us having to make these split second calculations like, if I do this, like, and just kind of wild in this moment, like I'm going to be an angry Black woman. So I got to keep it cute. And so I felt the pressures to like keep it cute. And I felt like I couldn't adequately tell this lady, like, girl, you need to, like, wait, we were here first. Like, I felt like I couldn't necessarily be that assertive because there were all these eyes on me, particularly all these non-Black folks who were around, the people from the PTO, the lady who was standing behind me who was rude. And so, like, I felt in that moment I could not really be as pointed as I wanted to. And so because I recognize that this is likely attached to some childhood experience or trauma where I felt shame and felt really bad, I realized that it was actually bringing up similar feelings to other instances where I felt like I stood up for myself and I was shamed for it. So it reminded me of when I was in middle school, like I was on the track team and I did shot put, which is like where you hold like the heavy, like round ball and you essentially throw it as far as you can. So I remember in middle school when I was on the track team and I was doing shot put, my school was playing against this other team, and one of the girls on the other team, I had already done my shot put, taken one of my first turns, and one of the girls on the other team started saying that they were throwing with the lighter shot put. They were throwing with the lighter ball. It's not fair, da-da-da-da. And me, myself, like I just, in that moment, my middle school self, like I felt pretty attacked in the sense of, no, like your team had been throwing with this exact same shot put. So even if it is like not the appropriate weight, like you all were throwing with the same shot put, so it was fair. And I came out and I said something like that. I was like, no, we were throwing with the exact same one that you all were throwing with. Do not try to play me and say that, and trying to insinuate essentially that I was cheating, because I was feeling really attacked by that because, it was my integrity that they were essentially calling into question. And I remember like the coach for the other team, it was like a middle-aged white man. He stepped in, he was just like, no one here is being rude to you or was rude to you. You're the one who's being mean and nasty and has this nasty attitude. We were just trying to clear up what was going on. So I just remember thinking back to that moment, like I just felt so much shame. Like I felt so much shame. I was essentially like speaking up for myself and telling y'all like, no, or telling these folks like, you can't, it's not right for you to insinuate that we were essentially cheating by throwing with a different shot put when very clearly we were throwing the same one. And in retrospect, looking back at that, like that man was the adult in the situation. We were all middle school girls. He was the adult in the situation. And I just look back on it and he was undoubtedly like treating me in a way, and probably the adultification of Black children, where Black children are not seen as innocent. They are seen as more adult-like and looked at as deviant. So for sure, looking back on that, that man handled that very poorly as an adult. I could never imagine like engaging a child that way. But I look back on that and I just remember feeling a lot of shame and feeling like not necessarily having like the language of like the angry black woman back then. But I look back on it and that's exactly what I was feeling. I felt that shame and that pain of standing up for myself. So as I moved throughout my life, I've started, in some instances, because like let's not get it confused, let's not get it twisted. I definitely say what I need to say when I need to say it a lot of times. But in some instances, particularly when I'm like having like W.E.B. Du Bois, like the double consciousness, which is as a black person, particularly as a black woman, but as a black person, Du Bois said that we carry around a double consciousness. We are mindful of how we are aware of how like the dominant society or non-black people view us, but then we're also mindful of who we really are and how we view ourselves. And so we kind of operate within that space. So because of like this double consciousness, or even adding on triple consciousness because I'm a woman, that's an additional marginalized identity. Because of this triple consciousness, I started to kind of operate within that space of I need to act a certain way so that I don't appear this other way like an angry black woman in these instances. But I can arrive at those conclusions and I can kind of interrogate that aspect of my personality in part because like I am reflective, introspective, and doing the work. And so what I want to emphasize in this moment is that doing the self-coaching, working through your trauma is absolutely, I think, an act of self-love. It is self-love because you are committed to doing the work of addressing those underlying traumas, addressing that pain, that the root of that pain that is causing you to show up in a particular way in your life that doesn't necessarily align with who you actually are and your authenticity. So I think that's one of the things that people don't often talk about when it comes to a self-love journey, when it comes to healing, is that it's hard. It's hard, it's painful, like no one wants to like dig up stuff from the past and like bring it into the present. But the thing is like, you're not even necessarily digging up stuff and bringing it into the present, because if the past is impacting how you are showing up and how you're acting in the present day, then it's relevant to your healing. So one of the things that I really recommend that if you are starting your self-love journey is to start a self-coaching program, because working through your trauma, working through like the things that have you triggered on a day-to-day basis, I think that is one of the kind of purest acts of self-love, because you're trying to help yourself move through the world in a way that is more true to you, that feels lighter, and puts you in a place where you feel like you can say what you need to say, be who you actually are, and show up in a way that is more in alignment with the person that you are striving to be. So the next thing that you can do if you want to start your self-love journey is to set boundaries in your relationships, with work, and with yourself. A lot of us, particularly people who are socialized as women and girls, particularly Black women, I think many of us are socialized and conditioned to put everybody's needs before ours, and we're just kind of conditioned and taught that, I think we're conditioned and taught that being selfish is like the worst thing in the world that you can be. Like, we are just kind of taught that we just have to bend over backwards for everyone, and that if we utter our desires or what we need or what we want, that we are being selfish, and therefore we are terrible people. And I think this is really common, and I think this is so common that many of us have gone through life and really quieted our desires, are very out of touch with what we need and what we want, so much that if someone blatantly comes out and asks us, like, what do you need? How can I support you? Many of us wouldn't even really have an answer, because we are often just taught through our interpersonal interactions, so like between people, we're often taught through our interpersonal interactions, as well as through television and movies, film, that we are supposed to be like these really selfless people. And selflessness It's something that we should all aspire to. It's just like a wonderful trait that everyone should aim to be. And we should just always be there if someone needs us or someone calls us. And we are taught that even to the detriment of ourselves, I think. So this reminds me of when I was in undergrad. So when I was in college, like 19, 20 years old, I just remember that I would always, no matter what I was doing, like I would pick up my phone. Like if someone from my family was calling, if one of my friends was calling, I would always pick up my phone. I don't care what I was doing. I could be like in the bathroom, about to walk into class, shopping, just doing anything, like resting, taking a nap. I would always pick up my phone and felt like I had to always answer my phone like on the first ring. And I remember like growing and feeling like I didn't have to do that anymore, particularly when I went to graduate school, because in graduate school I realized like, okay, like I was a mom as I was going through graduate school as well, but I just remember like going through graduate school and it was like, okay, if my phone rings, this is a boundary I set in my relationship. I was like, if my phone rings and I'm working and I'm like really in a flow, I'm not going to pick up my phone in those instances. I'm just going to call the person back. And so like, that's just an example of a boundary because I just decided like, hey, I'm working on this degree. This is something that's really important to me. I can't afford to like be breaking my concentration and breaking my workflow just because my phone is ringing. So that was kind of a boundary that I set in that moment. Another example of this, setting boundaries, like with relationships, is I had a friend, and this particular friend, like she would call me and we'd talk on the phone. We stay on the phone for like an hour, hour and a half plus, every time she would call. And I realized somewhere along the way, like the only things that we would talk about were her like dragging people, complaining, and just really negative. And I just noticed every time I would talk to her, I would just end up in this really negative space. And for me, just kind of, being a Black woman, being kind of like socialized to like put everybody else's needs ahead of my own, thinking about like, oh, I want to be a good friend. I want to be selfless, listening to your friends vent. Even though I'm not the type of person that ever vents to my friends, that's just not my personality. But even though like I felt like this energy shift or felt like this person and these conversations really don't do anything for me personally, I still felt the need to be this friend that is very supportive and there for this person when they need me. And so somewhere along the way, I remember talking to my therapist about this or just about this friendship in general. And there were other things going on in this friendship that were just not healthy. But I ended up ending the friendship. Because I realized like you really have to protect your energy, as well as relationships should be reciprocal, meaning you get something out of your relationships and that other person also gets something out of those relationships. And if those relationships are not reciprocal, then that may mean that you need to set a boundary. It may mean ending those relationships. So the boundary that I ended up setting was that like this person can no longer contact me. There were other problems with the friendship as well, but like the boundary that I set was literally like this person is blocked on everything. So your self-love journey will require, I think, will require you to set boundaries within your relationships with other people. But those boundaries also extend to work and extend to yourself as a person. So for me, one of the things that I have recently decided is I'm going to be very intentional about like the hours that I work, and I'm just not going to be letting work spill into every single area of my life like I have in the past. Like I'm a professor, so we have a lot of different responsibilities. Like teaching is just one aspect of my job. Researching is another aspect of my job. Applying for grants. So it's the type of job, like if I'm not careful, it could literally take up my entire life. So part of my self-love in action is setting boundaries around like how much time I spend on each task. I decided that I would work on like her guided evolution before 8 o'clock in the morning. So like I usually get up around like 6 o'clock, somewhere around 6 a.m. or I get up at 5:45 if I wake up with my kids. But I usually have about a 45-minute window between when I get my kids off to school and before 8 o'clock. I usually have like a 45-minute window, which I decided, like a boundary that I was going to set out of self-love, is that I was going to work on her guided evolution before 8 o'clock. So anything before 8 o'clock that I'm working on is going to be related to like my dream and my content creation, and anything after that, at least from 8 to 5, is going to be focused on my job as a professor. So that's an example of a boundary that I set for work. I remember when I was in graduate school, when I was working on my Ph.D, a boundary that I ended up setting was that I was not going to pull all-nighters anymore. I think I've said this before on this channel, but all-nighters, staying up all night to do schoolwork and things like that, like, it was a lot easier to do when I was like 18, 19. But when I was like working on my Ph.D and was 31, 32, those all-nighters just weren't all-nighting. They just weren't working for me. They hit different when you're in your early 30s versus in your late teens, early 20s. So I decided, like, I'm not going to pull all-nighters anymore. I'm not going to do this damage to my body and do this damage to myself. So that was an example of a boundary that I had to set out of self-love. Another example of just kind of setting boundaries for yourself, and these boundaries being an act of self-love, is me like really maintaining the commitments that I set out for myself. So like a boundary with myself is like, okay, I'm only going to spend like 30 minutes mindlessly scrolling through Instagram or X, formerly Twitter. So annoying. Like, I'm only going to spend 30 minutes scrolling through this and doing this mindless scrolling before I have to move on to something else, because these posts are really negative. They're putting me in a bad space. They're not exactly like helping me create the energy that I want to create. So that's an example of like a boundary that you'll have to set for yourself. Another example of this is when like now for my exercise, something that I do is I lift weights. And so a boundary that I had to set for myself is, okay, my goal for lifting weights is 4 to 5 days a week. I'm not going to allow myself to blow this off and only lift weights 3 days a week. So self-love really is an action, and that's something that I tell myself. And part of that action is setting boundaries for yourself, and setting boundaries within each aspect of your life, be it work, be it relationships. That's something that you can do if you are trying to start your self-love journey, is really just evaluate and see where you need boundaries. And that can be in various aspects of your life, not just with relationships, but also with work and setting boundaries with yourself. And another thing that you can do if you are trying to start your self-love journey is to practice self-care consistently, specifically daily. So this isn't one of those places where I'm going to say, like, if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else. Like, I fundamentally hate that perspective on self-care, so I'm definitely not going to promote it here. But I think self-care is important, and it's one of those things that really gives an indication, a very clear view of how you actually feel about yourself. Once again, I think so many of us, particularly Black women, we are conditioned to see ourselves in relation to what we can do for other people. We are conditioned to see ourselves as, being tired is like this badge of honor, being busy as this badge of honor, taking care of our kids and neglecting ourselves is kind of like this unspoken kind of like idea of we are good mothers because we put our kids first. And what I really want to stress in this like moment and in this video is that neglecting yourself is not cute. Like, it's really not cute. And I think a lot of us just kind of assume and kind of think like, okay, if I live my life like this, putting other people before myself, like taking care of my kids, like that means I'm a good mom. I'm tired. If I'm not tired, if I'm not burnt out, then I'm not working hard enough. And this is absolutely like wrapped up in like some capitalist rhetoric, but that's not what we're here for. So let me just stay on track. But essentially, I feel like so many of us just kind of think about self-care as something extra, just one more thing for us to do. And I really want to push back on that in this video. So I remember talking to my former therapist, and she was just brilliant. She would give me these like activities to do like week to week. And one of the activities that she would often give me to do is to really focus on practicing self-care in a way that felt authentic for me. So week after week, we would meet and she would be like, okay, so how did your self-care go this week? What did you do? And then I would always be like, well, I didn't do it formally, or, oh, I had a lot going on, so I didn't do all these things that you mentioned that we talked about last week, but I'll try and do it again. And so after several weeks of that, finally she was just like, she said something to the effect of, you're not self-caring because deep down you don't think you are worth it or worthy of the time and energy that is necessary to put into self-care. And that was one of those moments where I was just like, yeah, that's probably true. So the way that I came to that realization, it was just like, that is so true. Like, if I genuinely felt like I was valuable and worthy, and if I truly loved myself, I would be putting that in action through my self-care. But I just saw it as something that one more thing to do, one more thing that I had to do, versus something that was not necessarily necessary, because I feel like that's still wrapped up in that rhetoric of, oh, you have to take care of the people. I can't stand that perspective, but it's something that I deserve, and like something that I am worthy of, and my body deserves this care. My mind deserves this care and this grounding and this support. And so this really leads me to this idea, once again, that self-love is an action. Self-care, I think, is, like they say in church, like the fruit of how you feel about yourself. It is the physical manifestation, I think, of how you feel about yourself. Self-care is self-love in action in its purest form. That's what I truly believe, because I think you can tell how someone feels about themselves by the way they take care of themselves, by the way they operate. We can all sit and say like, oh, I love myself. I'm this, I'm that. I have on a full face of makeup. I know for me, that was my thing. I'd wake up, I'd have a full face of makeup on. I was pursuing a Ph.D, so I felt like my confidence was really in this place where it was a lot better. But the reality was, when you would look at my life, 'twas not the case, because my self-care was not self-caring. I was not putting the love that I was claiming to have for myself in action. So I want to challenge you, and I want you to think about, what does your daily self-care or your day-to-day life say about how you feel about yourself? How does your self-care demonstrate that you love yourself and that you are deserving and worthy of the time and energy that it takes to self-care? Is that reflective of what you think you feel about yourself and your worthiness? I want to know. I'm really curious. Like, really take a moment and sit with that. And so I think self-care and practicing self-care, not just going to get our nails done once every 2 weeks, or going on that lavish vacation or twice a year because that's what our job allows us for the vacation time. I think self-care are those day-to-day practices that ground you and support you. Be it stretching, waking up and doing some type of movement, practicing meditation. These are aspects that I think allow us to demonstrate that self-love on a daily basis by how we are caring for ourselves. And I actually created a free daily self-care plan that I will link down below and that you can download if you want to get started with a self-care template and to get started on your journey with self-love and self-care. But I really want you to continue thinking about and reflecting on how can you put your self-love in action, particularly through your self-care on a day-to-day basis. And that is a great place to examine if you are trying to start your self-love journey, is with your self-care. So I want to hear from you, and I want to continue this conversation. What is one action that you are going to take today to start your self-love journey? I want to hear about it. So please leave a comment, like this video, subscribe to the Her Guided Evolution YouTube channel, and let's continue on this self-love journey together. As I mentioned at the top of this video is actually part of my Black Women in Self-Love video series. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video, what Black women should know about self-love. Thank you so much for watching.